You've probably been told that glucose is your primary fuel source for energy, but in this video, I'm going to tell you why that's wrong, and I'm also going to tell you what your actual primary fuel source is, and I'm also going to just give you a couple reasons why that you shouldn't be eating carbs in the first place, because there's a lot of compelling reasons. Like, just to put it blankly, they're not good for you, but we're going to dive into that in a little bit. If you don't know me, my name is Keegan. I talk about diet and nutrition. I help people get onto keto, low carb, stuff like that, and I help people improve their health and their fitness. So if that sounds interesting to you, watch the rest of this video, subscribe, do that stuff. Let's get into it. So, why aren't carbs our primary fuel source? Because that's what we're all told from the baseline. I've had, I think, 3 separate biology classes, and every single one of them, we've gone over the same thing. Glucose is your primary fuel source. Glucose is your primary fuel source. But they fail to talk about literally everything else that creates energy in your body. Like, you know how some people take creatine, right? The reason why people take creatine isn't just for the muscle water effect. It's because you can use creatine for energy to a certain extent. Really? Yeah. You can use creatine for energy. You can use proteins for energy. You can use fat for energy. There's so much stuff that your body actually breaks down that it all comes down to ATP. There's a lot of like mechanisms, and there's a reason for that. Is because we're like just on a baseline, we're not meant to be eating a ton of plants. We're not meant to be eating a ton of sugar and carbohydrates just on a baseline, right? It's just we are not biologically designed for that. If we were, we wouldn't like we would be able to take in a lot of carbohydrates, store them effectively, and or we wouldn't run into the same issues that we do whenever we consume a ton of carbohydrates, like diabetes or like dementia, like or cancer, bro. Like there's so much stuff that is related to insulin resistance and just issues because we've been consuming so many carbohydrates. Kind of got off tangent. I kind of got off point there. We're not meant to be eating carbohydrates. Just a baseline, but we can still use them for energy. And our body, whenever it is saturated in carbohydrates, it will tend to try and use them up first. And that is why a lot of people will say, oh, but that's why glucose is our primary fuel source. Primary in the case of disordered eating, in my opinion. And the reason for that is because whenever your blood glucose gets too high, you will start getting into like hyperglycemia ranges, or even just like after a certain range. I believe it's after like 100 grams, 100 millimole or whatever per deciliter of blood sugar. After you reach that certain threshold, it starts becoming toxic in your body. And how is it toxic? I should probably explain that too. Whenever there's a certain amount of blood glucose just like floating around in your body, it's inherently, since it is sugar, just the way the molecules are built, it's going to start binding to things and fusing to things. And our body can handle a certain amount of that to an extent, right? Like I'll get to it a little bit later, but we do actually produce our own blood sugar. But whenever it's excessively high, you're causing more of that damage. You're causing more of that stress, more of this fusing to stuff that glucose typically does. There's a measure of what's called like glycated hemoglobin, which is it's a little bit complicated, but it's basically the amount of sugar that's been binding to the proteins in your red blood cells. And people typically use that. It's called a hemoglobin A1C. They typically use that as a score of, how much blood sugar has been damaging you. And whenever you get into the higher ranges, it shows that you're diabetic, or maybe that you're pre-diabetic. It just shows that you've been running into issues with a lot of blood sugar in your body, or your red blood cells live longer, but that's a separate point. Anyways, all of that to say that sugar damages your body on a fundamental basis. It's just how the thing is structured. And we can contain it within a certain, range. And that's important to note because whenever we consume carbohydrates outside of our body, right? We consume like a potato, or we consume a fruit, or we consume some sugary treat. Anything, it all increases our blood sugar. It all makes our body want to burn that so it can get it out of our bloodstream. That is why, to put it in a roundabout way, I suppose, that is why our body uses glucose first. But that's only whenever we're eating this stuff. Whenever we don't eat any carbohydrates, our blood sugar just remains steady. And there's a reason for that. Like I said before, we do make our own blood sugar. And that's because a certain few processes in our body do require blood sugar for energy. And this is important to note. They are anaerobic processes. Certain parts of your brain, they fire really fast and they prefer to use glucose because it's just faster to do an anaerobic process than to send everything through the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. It's just faster sometimes to just break up the glucose molecule and get that ATP right there. But that is for a few select cells in our body. Some, like our red blood cells, do also need that. There's a couple cells, and I think our kidneys as well. But it's a very, very small minority of cells that actually require glucose in order to function. And that is why we have, an inbuilt system to produce blood sugar, because that's like we have a certain requirement for it, and that's it. If we go above that, then we're damaging our bodies. Does that make sense? So overall, that's to say why glucose is considered the primary fuel source, but it's not actually. If we get into a place where we're not eating anything, or we're eating very, very low carbohydrates or no carbohydrates, we start producing what's called ketones. And I was thinking about calling this video, ketones exist, right? Because it's funny. Everywhere I look, whenever people I look up these clips online of people kind of like attacking like the keto or the low carb space, almost everyone starts out with carbs are your primary fuel source. It's like they haven't even ever heard of ketones before. Ketones exist, okay? And there's a reason why they exist. From my understanding, ketones are a fat derivative, but they're water soluble, because typically fat and water they don't mix well, right? But these ketones, they're water soluble, so they can go into your bloodstream and they can float around and actually provide you energy, right? Your liver makes them just like it makes the glucose. And that's just to provide you the energy that you need, right? There's three, I think, your body makes. There's acetone, acetoacetate, and then beta hydroxybutyrate, right? Those three, you make those obviously out of fat, and that is your energy source. I think they have the same or similar yield to carbohydrates in terms of how they run through the mitochondria, and so they're basically just like the fat version of carbs. But here's the thing: after you use them, you don't produce a bunch of reactive oxygen species. You can't really oversaturate your body with them, because since you're making them inside of your body, you're going to have your own like stop limits, as opposed to trying to figure out how many carbs should I carb load, and you're just poisoning your body the entire time. Your body will make the amount of ketones that your body actually needs. Does that make sense? Those are the primary fuel source for your body. I hope I'm explaining this well, at least to a decent degree. Ketones and fat are your primary fuel source, especially for something like your brain. Whenever your brain is running on ketones, even if the glucose level is elevated, it will 2/3 of your brain will take in the ketones preferentially. Okay, that is how you determine preference or primary. It's because your brain loves ketones, right? Like I said, 1/3 of your brain, certain parts that need anaerobic activity, will take in the carbs still, right? However, 2/3 of your brain, the majority of your brain, runs on ketones preferentially. And it's almost the same thing everywhere else in your body. So whenever your ketones are high and your glucose is high, typically your body's going to take in the ketones instead of the glucose. That's because ketones are just better, bro. They're just straight up better. um, I mean, that's just kind of the baseline. What else? I said I was going to tell you about the primary fuel source of the brain, why carbs aren't. I was just going to tell you why you shouldn't eat carbs in general. I mean, I kind of mentioned that a couple times with the blood sugar part, because blood sugar, again, at a certain level is toxic to your body. Um, I guess I should also bring this up. Most animals in the wild are in ketosis. And that sounds kind of weird because even if you look at stuff like cows, or you look at sheep or goats, or rabbits, or horses, even sometimes, wild horses, anyways, whenever they are eating a species appropriate diet, I would say like over 99% of animals are in ketosis. And I say that confidently. And the reason for that is because even if they are herbivores and they're eating carbs, right? They're eating a bunch of fiber. Most of the time, that gets fermented down in their guts to short chain fatty acids. You know how all these fiber bros are saying, "Oh, you should have fiber because it's indigestible, bro." And actually, the bacteria in your hindgut, in your large intestine, I think it was, the bacteria in your intestine will actually digest it and give you short chain fatty acids like what? Like fucking butyrate, bro. Really? Dude, your body makes beta hydroxybutyrate by itself. It doesn't need any fucking bacteria to digest fiber, right? Like, and people say, "Oh, these short chain fatty acids, that they they have so many benefits." Dude, your body can make those by itself. The ketone bodies, like your body will make ketones by itself if you just don't eat carbs. It's crazy. Ketones are anti-inflammatory. Ketones improve, I believe they improve your brain function as well. There's a lot of benefits to having ketones in your body. And you can just do that by not eating carbs. Yeah, but back to my last point there. Most animals in the wild are in ketosis, and animals who are not in ketosis are specifically designed for that. If you think like the first things that pop into my mind whenever I think about animals that consume carbs is like fruit bats and hummingbirds. But I I looked that up. I was like, why? Like, how do they not struggle with, like glycation and diabetes and stuff like that? And they have specific traits that they've evolved whenever they've been eating that stuff for a long time. They've evolved certain traits, like they take up glucose really, really fast in their muscles. They burn it off really fast, or they dump it out really quickly in their urine if they have excess glucose. There's lots of these ways that animals have evolved to eat sugar and to eat carbs, utilize them. We don't have those same pathways. Yeah, we can, like, I think a typical sign of diabetes actually is a lot of sugar in the urine, like ants will be attracted to your urine or something, bro. Because you will, like, our body doesn't want a bunch of glucose in us. And so it will take steps to dump excessive glucose, like whatever it takes. Whether that's by decreasing the amount of ketones in our body, so we just start using up the glucose more, or it could be even like dumping it out in the urine. Like, there's lots of ways that our body wants to remove this stuff from our body, and yet there's so many people trying to push, "Oh, but you need carbs are your primary fuel source, carbs are your primary fuel source." They're not. I mean, like, I think I've covered most of the bases here. Carbs are not your primary fuel source. Just at the end of the day, do one more step of research than what your 7th grade biology class told you, and you'll figure it out. Like, it's that simple. There's other forms of energy that your body actually prefers. I'm trying to think of anything else to say, and I don't think there is. Remove the carbs from your diet and see what happens. You will have like sugar withdrawals. You'll have sugar cravings, and that's because I mean, this is another point. Sugar is addictive. Carbs are addictive to a degree. And that's because they're a drug. It's just they are. Okay? Maybe not as bad as like crack, but sugar is a drug to an extent. So just be mindful of that. Try it out. Try cutting the carbs from your diet for 3 weeks. See what happens. Just experiment with it and see what happens. I think you'll end up a lot healthier. Excuse me, a lot healthier, a lot clearer minded, and I think you'll actually have more energy than ever before. Last fun fact: even if you were a super lean individual, you have, I think it's like 20 to 40 times more stored energy in your body fat stores than you do in your glycogen. Meaning, if you were able to access that by not eating carbs, you're able to access your fat stores, you would have 20 times more energy, 40 times more energy available to you just because you didn't eat a drug, addictive drug that was tarnishing your health. I think that's a pretty good trade-off. Anyways, that's enough of my yapping. Hope you maybe learned something. Hopefully, I hope I at least intrigued you to do some further research on your own. I don't expect you to trust me for my word one for one, but go research this stuff. Go ask ChatGPT about ketones and about human metabolism, because I think the answers you'll find will be intriguing at the very least. They don't even have to agree with me all the way, but just educate yourself a little bit more. It doesn't have to be through schooling. Just do some research. Just look look online, get some books, whatever it is. Yeah. So hopefully this video you found helpful. If you did, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.